Now we'll look at developmental criminology theories. Developmental criminology theories are a bit different from developmental psychology theories, but a lot of developmental criminology is rooted in developmental psych principles. The theories that I've talked about so far are coming from what I would refer to as the adolescence-limited criminology paradigm that I think I alluded to last week, where they tended to focus only on why some individuals in adolescence engage in criminal behavior and why others do not. So what are the differences between these two groups? So this is really important to understand. In criminology, traditionally, based on the theories we've discussed so far, the question was, why does a person not offend? It's because they had attachment and somebody else did not. They were committed and someone else was uncommitted. They were exposed to delinquent peers and they were not exposed to delinquent peers. So it's about this dividing of groups. And we make comparisons between the groups. So these youth had attachment to others. These youth did not have attachment to others. Which group was more or less likely to engage in criminal behavior? Developmental criminology emphasizes that between group comparisons are important, but equally or maybe even more important is the notion of within individual change or within individual stability. So what I'm interested in is not just whether John's level of involvement in pro-social activities is higher than Gary's level of involvement in pro-social activities. I want to look at John and I want to interview him on multiple occasions. When he is 8 years old, maybe I'd be interviewing the parents, but then 14 interviewing him and re-interviewing this individual over the life course to examine whether his level of involvement changes over time, and does this change have implications for whether they increase their level of offending or decrease their level of offending. So developmental criminology really emphasizes looking at a much broader set of risk factors. This is why Goverson and Hershey hated developmental criminology, because they said that low self-control causes all crime all the time. Developmental criminology says, no, there's a lot of different risk factors that matter. And guess what, Goverson and Hershey? What matters at age 4 is different from what matters at age 10, at age 15, at age 30. We have to look at the dynamic nature of the life course. When you're 4 years old, you're probably not at risk of crystal meth use. What is going to matter for antisocial behavior or aggressive behavior at age 4 is maybe going to be more tied to the family unit, because at age 4, that's more like your entire social circle. At age 13, when individuals are trying to demonstrate independence or autonomy from parents, maybe peers are going to be more important. In adulthood, maybe it's going to be your employment or your marital partner, your children, that are going to be the key risk factors. And we'll see that this is also a theme in life course criminology. But the idea here in developmental criminology is that not only are risk factors potentially dynamic, so too is criminal behavior. Criminal behavior can change over time as well. And so we need to study these transitions that we refer to as the criminal career. And here's a really important point where people can sort of hear those two terms and make an assumption that is incorrect. The criminal career approach has nothing to do with being a criminal as a career. It is not about being a professional thief or about being a gang member. The term criminal career is just referring to the longitudinal study of crime over time, starting with things like the age of onset of offending. And developmentalists think that the earlier you begin to offend, the longer your criminal career will likely last. But a criminal career could be one single crime, or it could be 53 different crimes. Criminal career research is interested in how many crimes did an individual commit at the adolescence age stage, and did they change over time? So that's developmental criminology. It places also a very big emphasis on onset, and we'll see that in a couple of the developmental theories I'll talk about now. The researcher that's probably had the greatest influence on my own research in my career would be Moffitt, Terry Moffitt, and her development of the dual taxonomy. The dual taxonomy, I think, was a little bit more complex and a little bit more detailed than Patterson's coercion development theory. Like Patterson, Moffitt acknowledged two trajectories that she termed adolescence limited and life course persistent. The AL, adolescence limited trajectory, shows signs of offending in adolescence and then a quick decline thereafter in adulthood. Keep in mind, this is just a theoretical perspective. It doesn't mean that it's exactly in empirical reality. The life course persistent, or LCP trajectory, is the individual that shows signs of early antisocial behavior, like age 4, 5 years old, they're aggressive, they're throwing temper tantrums, and this continues to more serious extent throughout the entire life course. Moffitt suggested that these different trajectories are associated with different causes. The AL individuals are associated with what I would refer to as social mimicry, or what Moffitt referred to as social mimicry. So in childhood, they have little to no antisocial behavior. In adolescence, they engage in minor delinquency because they're exposed to delinquent behavior of peer groups, and they want to mimic this behavior. So the AL trajectory is very much a social learning theory mechanism type of explanation. Individuals in this trajectory are trying to bridge a maturity gap. What this means is that they're now kind of physically like adults. They want to take on adult roles, but 16, 17 years old, simply lacking the skills or abilities to, say, go out and get a job, to be able to buy the car that they want, to have the autonomy that they seek. So they might engage in acting out behaviors as a proxy for being able to take on adult roles. Moffitt suggested that by adulthood, these individuals would desist from crime because now the maturity gap has closed. They now are actual adults and they get to go out and get a job, be married, have a little bit more freedom, and so on. So we'll see a reduction in the crime rate here because the costs of crime are now higher. They don't want to engage in criminal behavior because maybe that will jeopardize their marriage or their job. The LCP trajectory, on the other hand, as I mentioned, antisocial conduct begins at a very early age, and it's due to two factors. It's the intersection of family adversity or negative family environment and neuropsychological deficits. Both of these factors have to be present in order for an individual to be associated with a life course persistent trajectory. Like Patterson, Moffitt raises this idea of cumulative disadvantage or cumulative consequences. Because of the neuropsychological deficit and because of the family adversity, this individual may develop poor pro-social social skills. So they behave poorly in, elementary school, and it might alienate them from peers, might alienate them from teachers. So maybe now they perform poorly in school, or they drop out of school, they skip school, or they look for people that are going to reward that behavior. And who's going to reward that behavior? Typically older peers who are also involved in delinquent behavior that might encourage or reinforce that individual's decision to skip school. So here's where we see that accumulation of negative consequences. Now they're dropping out of school, so they're going to be unable in adulthood to get a job, to be able to experience those thoughts of, like, if I engage in criminal behavior, it could jeopardize my adult role. They might not really be in these positive adult roles to begin with because of the accumulation of consequences. As I stressed earlier, it's a theory. Doesn't mean that it's an empirical reality. So a couple points to make here. When it comes to adolescence limited offending, it doesn't seem to stop right at adulthood, right at age 18, a switch turns off or turns on. Why would this be the case? Well, remember we talked about how in that New York Times article, the idea of like delayed adolescence or emerging adulthood, it now takes much more time to step into adult roles. The maturity gap has widened where, I'm not talking just about you, but for myself, when I was, finishing high school, it was clear that you needed to go to university to get the job that you wanted to have. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I definitely never thought I would be doing this as my career, but it was the idea that, okay, adulthood didn't start when I ended high school. I couldn't start a job right away. I wasn't getting married right away. All these things don't happen right at age 18. Maybe in the 1920s they did. But for contemporary society, maybe Moffitt really needs to think a little bit about emerging adulthood. And it's not adolescence limited offending, but maybe it's like adolescence through emerging adulthood, and then offending begins to stop.